Hi, everyone. Welcome. I know folks are starting to join, and I want to give a real welcome to everyone as you come in. It was wonderful to see many of you at the 50th anniversary celebration last week, and we're thrilled to continue our work in the Impacting Policy series. This session, we will focus on the state budget process, and we're really grateful to have Scott Ogus joining us. I will introduce him in just a moment. I also want to give a thanks to my co-director, Janet Kaufman, who's also joining us. And also to remind folks that we are having another in-person half-day workshop on meeting with policymakers. We'll be joined by two longtime Sacramento legislative staff members, and that will be next Monday, the 17th in the morning. We'll put the link in the chat a little bit later too, but don't feel like it's too late. We would love to still have you join us if you're interested. And as always, feel free to put your questions in the chat as you think of them in the Q&A. And at the end, we've got about 10 or 15 minutes at the end where we'll save the questions and ask Scott to answer them then. But without further ado, I want to go ahead and thank and introduce Scott Ogus. Scott is currently Deputy Staff Director at the California Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review. Previously, he was principal consultant to that same committee since 2017, with primary responsibility over the state's health programs, including Medi-Cal, the Department of Public Health, Covered California, the Department of Managed Healthcare, and Community Mental Health. Prior to working at the Budget Committee, Scott spent 5 years working on the Medi-Cal budget at the Department of Finance and 4 years as a legislative staffer in the State Assembly. He earned a master's in public policy from the Goldman School at UC Berkeley. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Scott. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you, Beth. It's really exciting to be here. It's really great that you have this group together. Having health policy folks or sort of health practitioners and faculty members really have the ability to get engaged in what we do up here in Sacramento and influence health policy. I think is really important, and I'm happy to help in making that engagement a little bit more effective and impactful. So as Beth said, I'm Scott Ogus. I'm the Deputy Staff Director for the Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review. We are our staff here in the Budget Committee are advisors to our Budget Chair, Senator Nancy Skinner, and the members of the Senate Budget Committee, and as well as the other members of the California Senate in managing the process of getting the budgets considered, modified, changed, and ultimately approved to reflect the priorities of both the legislature and the governor, and hopefully the people of California through their elected representatives. So I'm going to start sharing screen here and go through my slides. Let me make sure I get to the right one here. I think this is it. There we go. Is that coming through okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So, the budget is, I'll just a couple of warnings, before we get started. The budget is a very dense topic, and it takes people who work on the budget many years to really understand all of the levers and the gears that go into making a $300 billion document that governs the entire state of California's departments and entities work. So, there's going to be a lot of jargon here. Some of it, you're going to be thinking I'm speaking a totally different language, but feel free to follow up with any questions after the presentation is over. These slides I think will be available afterwards. So, and I think this presentation will be recorded. So, feel free to kind of look over it again. I'll reiterate at the end, feel free to reach out to any of us here in the legislature or who work on this stuff for any further information. So, I think we'll start with, we'll start with some basic definitions. Kind of go through, what what is a budget? What are the components of a budget? We'll take a look at the anatomy of the Budget Act so that when you're looking at the budget itself, you know what you're looking at, or at least have an idea of where to look for things. We'll do a brief overview of the process. We're very deadline driven in the budget process, similar to the policy bill process for legislation. We'll talk about trailer bills. This is a question we get a lot about what trailer bills are and what they are not, and also how to find where they are before they are enacted. It's something we hear a lot and hear a lot of complaints about. And then we'll talk a little bit about where are the key points in the process for advocates to make the biggest impact and have the biggest opportunities for engagement. So starting off with just some basic definitions of the state budget. Well-known senator in 2008, who you may have heard of, wrote in the New York Times, "Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value." That's not the first time that anyone's made that formulation, but I think it's the earliest version of it I've seen in print. But like most things Joe Biden says, I think he attributed it to his father. But it's something that I think is pretty standard amongst budget types. That budgets really are a reflection of values. In this case, the state budget, in its ideal and idealized version, is a reflection of the collective priorities and values of the state of California through their elected representatives in the state assembly and the state senate, and through the governor through negotiation and compromise. So that's sort of the emotionally pleasing version of what a budget is. So here's the technical details of what a budget is. So the budget, is shorthand for two sets of documents, two sets of bills. We have budget acts, which are the bills that contain the appropriations for all of state government. These are the amounts of expenditure authority that state agencies are allowed to spend. So if you're looking for the money and allocations for specific purposes, you want to look at the Budget Act. And then also, when people talk about the budget, they're also generally referring to trailer bills. Trailer bills are bills that contain all of the changes in statute that are required to implement the appropriations that are included in the budget. Program changes and creating new programs or amending existing programs and whatnot. Here's some examples of this year's Budget Act bills. So SB 154 was the main Budget Act, and then AB 178 and AB 179 were also Budget Acts. Those last two are what are colloquially referred to, we were affectionately referred to as Budget Bill Junior, because they amend the first Budget Act. So in this instance, and this doesn't always happen, but it's happened more frequently recently, SB 154 was the Budget Act that was passed by the legislature that was reflective of an agreement between the two houses of the legislature only. So just the Senate and the Assembly had agreed on a balanced budget. And then AB 178 was passed a couple weeks later, that amended the two-party budget, but it included the changes that reflected the negotiations with the governor and reflected the final budget agreement. And then AB 179 was a later Budget Act that amended further the Budget Act that we had passed in June, and reflected some additional negotiations and discussions with the governor. Here's some examples of some trailer bills. Our health omnibus this last year was SB 184. A lot of really interesting stuff in there. The Office of Healthcare Affordability comes to mind. Expansion of Medi-Cal, regardless of immigration status, to all income eligible adults was in there. But there are topical trailer bills in every issue, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. AB 190 was our higher education trailer bill. SB 198 was transportation, and I think there were probably about 24 trailer bills in the first round in June, and then probably another dozen or so that happened in August. So you've probably heard the term appropriation, and the appropriation is really kind of the source code for how dollars are allocated in the state budget. So what an appropriation really is it's not, we're not taking money, we're not sitting it, putting in, if you're appropriating $100 million to the Department of Healthcare Access Information, for example, we're not putting $100 million into that department's account. What we're really doing is in this appropriation, where we're providing authority for the departments to make an expenditure from a specific fund, whether it's a state fund like the general fund, federal funds, special funds like, say, Prop 63 or Prop 56, tobacco tax funds, or some other kind of fund like a bond fund, for example. And then, the basics, really basics down to brass tacks. The fiscal year begins July 1st and ends June 30th of the subsequent year. That's different in California than the federal fiscal year, which starts on October 1st and ends on September 30th, which can sometimes be challenging to have different fiscal years, but we get through it. All right, so a little bit of anatomy for the State Budget Act. So this is, so the Budget Act looks like any other bill going through the legislature. This is the front cover over here on the left, SB 154. It is a very large document. It's probably about, the picture on the right is about, maybe 2 inches, 2.5 inches thick. It's not like a floor to ceiling thing like you often see, in some of those dramatic presentations of, here's what the state budget looks like. It's this giant document, 6,000 pages. But it is an extensive document because a $300 billion budget for a state that is serving 40 million people, it takes a minute to write it all down. So that's physically what it looks like. Excuse me. So the Budget Act has a lot of different components to it. The most important component, I think, you'll find is the appropriations that I discussed a minute ago. Section 2.00, which happens pretty early in the budget, is where all of those appropriations are. So it's often the biggest part of the Budget Act. Budget Acts are the only type of bill that are allowed to have more than one appropriation. Generally, some leeway there, but generally the budget bill is the only one that is allowed to have more than one appropriation. And then the other parts of the Budget Act are what are known as control sections. And these are sections that can have a lot of different functions. Sometimes they're used to set aside specific funding for some purpose. Many years ago, when we were covering the new Hep C drugs, Harvoni, I believe, is what it is. The current version, I think, it was Sovaldi before. It was a really expensive expenditure for a lot of state departments. It was expensive for Medi-Cal, expensive for the prison system, is expensive for CalPERS and our healthcare programs. And so they set aside a few $100 million specifically for expenditures related to Hep C medication. But then sometimes there are other items of appropriation. I think the most common use of control sections is to provide authority to make mid-year adjustments. So there are certain control sections like control section 28.00, which allows for state entities to accept federal grants, because a lot of times those things are unpredictable and you never know when a federal grant cycle is going to come in, and you need to make authority. And usually there's some kind of notification to the legislature so that we're aware that this is happening and they're making these adjustments. And then then there's some pretty mundane stuff like updates to personnel costs, changes to retirement rates and employee compensation and things like that. So this is what an appropriation looks like, and like I said, this is probably looks like you're speaking a different language, but this is really the source code for how money in the, funding in the state goes from being a revenue from whatever source to funding a state program. In this instance, this is probably one of our largest general fund appropriations. This is the general fund appropriation for the Maine Medi-Cal program. So it's $34 billion. So just to break down what is included in something like this. So what I first want to draw your attention to is this code up at the top left, this 4260-101-0001. So this is the item, what's known as the item of appropriation. This is where I mean, this is probably the first place that the controller will look to see where, where the money is going and what fund it's coming from. So the way that this is broken down is those first four numbers are what's known as the organizational code. So in this case, the Department of Healthcare Services, their organization code is 4260. And if you're looking for what department maps to what organizational codes, the Budget Act has an index at the end. It's one of their control sections. So if you just kind of scroll all the way to the end, you'll see an index of all of the organizational codes if you're trying to match items of appropriation with the department you're trying to look up. So it's there's a helpful reference at the end. The middle number 101 is generally a reference number. Sometimes it's sequential, but and there are some numbering conventions that append themselves to the reference number. Generally speaking, if there's a zero in the first digit, it's usually for appropriations for administration of state departments. So the staff and contracts that a state department is funding will come out of what's known as a state operations item, and usually has a zero. So it'll be 001 or 011 or something like that. In this instance, something with a 1 as the first digit is generally a local assistance item, and in this case is used for providing funding for mostly in this case the Medi-Cal managed care plans, but also to counties and other people who are implementing the programmatic details of the Medi-Cal program. And then the final four digits are the fund. So in this case, 0001 is the general fund, but every fund source in the state has a code. There are literally thousands of them. And the Department of Finance has a helpful guide if you're looking for what a fund number is. You can find it there. So then over here on the right is the total amount of the appropriation. This is how much expenditure authority is provided for that organization from the fund that's in the item of appropriation, and broken out by the schedule of appropriations, which I'll get to in a second, and then governed by any requirements that are in the provisional language below. I promise this is going to be important later. So like I said, the schedule here, this is a lot of departments have specific programs. In this case, there are three different main places where money from the Medi-Cal program goes. They go to counties for eligibility determination, so those county eligibility workers. They go to the fiscal intermediary system, which is what it used to be called CAMUS. Now it's MES, I think. They're the ones who pay the bills for fee-for-service Medi-Cal, and then the benefits for Medi-Cal. $35 billion of general fund. For all of those managed care plans and fee-for-service expenditures, and skilled nursing and everything else. And then finally, provisions. So this tends to be important in terms of your advocacy, and I'll describe a little more detail why later. Provisional language is attached to items of appropriation and is used similar to bill language and statutory language to govern how that expenditure authority is used. So you can either use it to set aside an amount of funding. So this is one example I've used here. This is the provisional language that governs the Behavioral Health Continuum Infrastructure Program, which was for over multiple years about a $2 billion program to build out our behavioral health infrastructure. Here, this provision sets aside, a little over $1.1 billion for this purpose. So you can use provisional language to set aside a certain amount of an appropriation for a specific purpose. You can use it to set time limits on the authority. In this case, they've allowed the authority to be available until 2027. But you can pretty much do whatever you need to with provisional language. There's a lot of times where you'll have a grant program and you'll have specific parameters of how the grants are supposed to go out built into provisional language, because a lot of grant programs are one-time expenditures, and so you'll want to build in those parameters into the provisional language when you make the appropriation. And just for completeness, here's an example of what a control section looks like. So control section is, in this case, usually you don't have to pay too much attention to control sections, except in certain instances. In this case, this was a bit of an important one. This was the mid-year authority for the department, or for the administration, to make changes related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So their ability to move money around to address emergent needs having to do with emergency response, or surge, hospital surge, or any other issues that were happening in relation to the pandemic. And you'll see at the bottom there's a requirement that they notify the legislature 10 days before they release those, or they make those changes. So at least there's a little bit of oversight. There's a little bit of trust here too. You're providing a lot of authority to the administration, but in an emergency situation, it's generally a little bit more appropriate to provide that flexibility. All right, so we've gone through essentially what is in the budget and what a budget looks like. So let's talk about how the budget process goes from start to finish. So these are some of our key deadlines. Some of these are constitutional, some of these are by statutorily required. But really, the public face of the budget process really gets going on January 10th. So the Constitution requires the governor to submit a balanced budget by January 10th of every calendar year. And usually there's a press conference, and the governor presents the budget. On February 1st, the governor is required to provide drafts of any proposed trailer bill language that's associated with the budget that was released in January to the legislature for review. And that's usually posted on on the Department of Finance's website, which I'll go into a little bit more detail within a little bit. On April 1st, the governor provides the first adjustments to the January budget in what's called the April Finance Letter. Usually these are kind of minor changes to positions, and when they're in a specific department, if they're asking for a certain number of positions for some proposal, this is their first opportunity to make changes to that if they've estimated things are different, or they want to make some changes. And then May 14th, you probably all heard of the May revision, or some people call it the May revise, but as budget types, we call it the May revise too sometimes, but its technical term is the May revision to the governor's budget. And this is the governor's opportunity to provide a comprehensive adjustment to the January budget based on updated revenue estimates that are received after everybody does their taxes in April. In the past, we as the legislature have tried to not have really, and the governor too has tried not to have really big substantive proposals happen at the May revision. But there's been a little bit of a departure from that practice recently, where we're seeing more and more a lot of really big substantial proposals happen and be proposed in the May revision. So then after May revision, the Constitution requires the legislature to adopt a balanced budget by June 15th of each calendar year. Point I'll make later is that the governor doesn't have to sign that budget, but the Constitution requires that the legislature adopt one. And then July 1st is the beginning of the new fiscal year, as I mentioned before. So here are some of the key players. Obviously, we in the legislature, like this key player. So here are here's sort of the structure of how the legislature organizes its efforts in overseeing the budget. The Senate and the Assembly both have a main budget committee. Ours is the Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review. The Assembly's is just called the Committee on Budget. And then there are 5 subcommittees, each with different jurisdiction over different portions of the budget, over different issue areas. For some reason, we over the years have never managed to align between the two houses the numbers with the topics. Maybe we'll do that in the future, but so sometimes see your shorthand on saying something's in subcommittee 3. You're doing health and human services on the Senate side, but it's resources and transportation on the Assembly side. But so each of these subcommittees have their own jurisdiction. In the Senate, subcommittee 1 is education, 2 is resources and environmental protection, energy and transportation, 3 is health and human services, which I imagine is of interest to this group. And it's the one that I am one of the primary staff members on. Subcommittee 4 is State Administration, General Government. Sub 5 is Correction, Public Safety, and Judiciary. And then the Assembly, Sub 1 is Health and Human Services, Sub 2 is Education, Sub 3 Resource Transportation, Sub 4 is State Administration, and Sub 5 is Public Safety. Some of the other key players, I've mentioned the Department of Finance. Department of Finance is the Director of Finance is the Governor's Chief Fiscal Policy Advisor. But the department, which is led by the Director of Finance, works to develop the Governor's budget and the May revision, and is involved in negotiations for the final budget act. We also work with the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is a nonpartisan office that provides fiscal and policy advice to the legislature. They do really great analyses of the budget and the May revision as they come out, and they sit in with us during subcommittee hearings and budget committee hearings to provide their testimony and their expertise on all these issues. So the calendar. So like I said, the budget process has similar cadence that is governed by its deadlines. It's very deadline driven, similar to the policy process for legislation. But there's a lot of things that happen before January 10th that most people don't see, and you only really see when the full budget is revealed on January 10th. But beginning around June, state agencies, departments, they start thinking about, well, what is it that we need for next year? What's our workload been like? Do we need some more staff in these departments? Have we been considering some really great new programs that we want to propose? So they start getting that stuff together around June. And over the summer they finalize those things, and then they submit those things to the Department of Finance for approval in early September. So September, the Department of Finance starts receiving things like budget change proposals, which are, broadly speaking, requests for positions or other expenditure authority for a specific purpose or program. A lot of times, they're a workload. They're abbreviated BCPs. So a lot of times they're workload BCPs that are just, hey, we've had a lot of extra workload in this department, so we need 3 or 4 extra positions to do it. Or, hey, we want to do this brand new program and we need to create a new division for it, and this is how we're gonna fund it. And then local assistance estimates. These are usually big binders full of programmatic expenditures. The Medi-Cal estimate is the most well-known and physically burdensome one. I think it's up to 1,200 pages now. But those are those are, and CalWORKs, and I think the Department of Social Services has their local assistance estimates for their programs. Department of Public Health has them as well. And so these are just estimates of what they think the enrollment in these programs are going to be, what the caseload, the population, what the expenditures are, and whether or not there are any changes that are being proposed. And so for the Department of Finance, these final decisions are usually being made in early to mid-December. And that gives them enough time to get ready for the release of the budget in January. There we go. So January 10th, the governor and the Director of Finance present the budget at a press conference. And those budget documents are posted online at www.ebudget.ca.gov. So once the press conference ends, usually all of the budget documents are posted up there, and you can take a look at the budget summaries, and you can look at what each department is being, the levels that each department are being funded at, and also, after the release of the budget, oftentimes agencies and departments will do briefings for legislative staff and stakeholders. I know the HHS agency does a stakeholder briefing very shortly after the release of the budget. And I know some of the bigger departments like Department of Healthcare Services do that. I'm not as familiar with some of the other non-HHS departments, but I'm fairly certain that they do they do these briefings as well. So it's a good opportunity to hear directly from the people within the administration what it is that they're proposing and what they are going to be working on. So February 1st is when the governor releases the drafts of proposed trailer bill to accompany the January budget. Both the budget change proposals that were included in the January budget and trailer bill language are posted on the Department of Finance's website. and that's at www.dof.ca.gov. And here's what that looks like. You can see there are two links right there on their front page that'll get you where you need to go. This is where you click on to get to your budget change proposals, and this is where you go for your trailer bills. So once the budget is released, beginning in late February, early March, our budget subcommittees start considering every proposal in the January budget. We will, well, it's been a little bit different over the past 2 years because of hearing space constrictions or restrictions based on the pandemic. But I'm, knock on wood, hoping we're going to go back to a more regular schedule starting in the next budget cycle. So those hearings will generally run either once or twice a week between February and May. So those hearing schedules are usually posted in each house's daily file, which you can find at the links below. And then before the subcommittee hearings, you can find the agendas, which will describe what are being heard in each subcommittee hearing at these links on our committee websites. sbud.senate.ca.gov is ours, and abudget.assembly.ca.gov is the assemblies. So during subcommittee hearings, the director or the other staff of the department being heard will present their proposals to the subcommittee members. The chair will ask for comments from the department, and then from the Department of Finance and the Legislative Analyst's Office. And then the chair and the members of the subcommittees will ask questions of the director regarding their proposals. But then after member questions, there's an opportunity for public comments. We've been doing most of these through a call-in number during the COVID era, and I think that will probably, hopefully, continue. But there's also an opportunity if you're in Sacramento in person to register a public comment in the committee hearing room while it's going on. And then the call-in number is usually posted on the screen and announced by the chair. And comments are usually limited to 1 minute per person. So it's important if you're going to make a comment that you are very clear and concise and are able to get your point across quickly. So then May revision rolls around on May 14th. And this is when, so it's very similar to the January 10th process. The documents are also posted on that same eBudget websites. And then all the budget change proposals and trailer bill language are posted on the Department of Finance website as well at the same links. And so after May 14th, that's when the legislature starts to gather and the caucuses kind of get together to make final decisions on what changes they want to make to the governor's May revision budget, reflecting what the legislature's priorities are. Perhaps increasing certain expenditures in certain areas, or rejecting certain things that the governor has proposed, or making brand new proposals. Usually the Senate and Assembly adopt different versions of their budgets that reflect the different houses' priorities. And then sometimes the two houses will agree to reconcile those differences in a conference committee, which has membership of both houses, and try to arrive at a final budget. Sometimes this is a mechanism for just the two houses to agree on a final budget. Or sometimes there's a conversation and negotiation with the governor as well, and you end up with a final three-party budget that includes the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor. So like I said, June 15th, Constitution requires the legislature to pass the balanced budget or forego their salary. That was Prop 25 from, about 10 years ago. But the governor isn't required to sign it. So occasionally this dynamic results in a two-party budget, which is what happened this year, that we passed on June 15th, and then a budget bill junior that amends the first budget to reflect whatever agreement we come to with the governor, which is exactly what happened in this last budget cycle. All right, so trailer bills. This is there's a lot of consternation over trailer bills. People, we hear a lot that things show up in trailer bills and they've never seen them before. They don't know where they came from. Well, I'm here to tell you there are places you can look to find where trailer bills are proposed and see them before they make their way into law. So what is a trailer bill? So we talked about provisional budget language in the Budget Act, and you can use that language to administer the governance of a program. But the budget bill is only a one-year document. So if you have something that's ongoing, a new program or multi-year program, it's better to memorialize all those details in state statute and the code, so that it's the budget kind of comes and goes, but state statutes is forever, at least until it's amended. So trailer bills get proposed by the governor in February, and then later in the process, the legislature can propose changes. And these are bills that make the required changes to statute to implement these proposals. Trailer bills are bound by the single subject rule, so they will only cover one subject, health, human services, education, etc. They are called trailer bills because they will often trail behind adoption of the Budget Act. And they were required to contain exactly one appropriation, so that they're considered to be trailer bills, and so that they're able to be enacted immediately. And so the drafts of the trailer bills can be found, like I said, on the Department of Finance website. So here's that view again. If you click on that link, you will end up on this page that looks like this, and you'll see all of the different topics here: corrections and general government, education, employee compensation. If you were to click on, say, health and human services, you would see this, and each one of these is a link to a PDF that will either have a legislative council version of bill language or a mock-up of bill language for you to look up, and including when it was last updated. So if you're looking for trailer bills, this is where you find them. They're on the Department of Finance website. Click on trailer bill and then look around for the trailer bills that you're looking for. All right, so this is, I think, what you've all been waiting for. This is, the key decision points during the process, and where you can best find your way into improving your advocacy. So how can advocates influence the budget process? So I think that, what I tell a lot of folks who come to talk to me about how to be successful with something that they're promoting, or some kind of new program or proposal that they have, is that the three keys are really preparation, organization, and communication. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I mean by each of those. Oops, sorry about that. So in terms of preparation, I think you gotta, a lot of this sounds a lot like stuff that they teach us all, and they teach it, us all in policy school. And I don't know if anybody else has been to policy school, but in terms of preparing for making a proposal to the legislature or making a budget proposal to the legislature or to the administration, it's important to be very clear about what problem you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to accomplish and what problem you're trying to solve. So for example, and not to get into things that I'm sure some folks here may have worked on in recent years. Are you trying to increase state funding for primary care residency slots? Or are you trying to improve access to primary care for Californians? These are two things that sound like they could be the same thing, but if you're trying to solve for one versus the other, it affects what your optimal program design is. If all you are trying to aim for is, well, we just want more state funding for primary care residency, then you'll just make the appropriation, set it and forget it, and then you'll have more slots, and that'll be the end of it. But if the goal is to increase access to primary care for Californians, you might do something like have a service commitment for serving people who don't have access to primary care. So these are things that it's important to really be clear about what it is you're trying to accomplish, which will help you determine what your program design will look like when you're making your proposal. It's also important to do your research. So, every program in state government has a department and a group of people who are staffing that department who implements those proposals and programs. There needs to be an item of appropriation that allows the funding to be, that allows the expenditure authority to be released to whatever department is administering those programs. So if you're going to if you have an idea of what you want to do, what your proposal is, or a change you want to make, it's important to know what department or entity does that kind of work. So if you will look, you want to look at the past history of similar types of programs, see what departments have done programs like that in the past. Whether that's within the wheelhouse of that department's expertise. And it's not an easy thing to do because there's lots of departments that do fairly similar things. But like I say here, if you need help figuring it out, you can always reach out to the department staff themselves. Their ledge and government affairs people will help you, usually, if you can get a hold of them. Or you can talk to somebody like me, your friendly legislative budget consultant, and we'll try to point you in the right direction. And then funding. So this is a question we get a lot. So how do you determine how much money you're going to ask for? Well, it's one, I think it's important to be realistic about what a program costs, and there are ways to get at that. You can ask department staff for help. You can ask us in the budget committees for help. What does it cost for staff? What is construction or materials or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. But then, there's also a little bit of a political and strategic component to it as well. Having a clear idea over whether there is, say, in a budget year, a lot of one-time revenue to be had, or if maybe there's a more stable revenue picture over multiple years. That can affect whether or not you decide to make something a one-year project that is available over multiple years, or if there's something that you're going to fund ongoing over the course of the multiple years, each year at a time. So those are important questions that you should have answered before you start making your proposals. And then language. So we talked about budget bill language and trailer bill language. You have to ask yourself the question: do you need language for your proposal? And the answer is usually yes, even if it's a small amount of language. If you're making a one-time expenditure, you'll probably want to use budget bill language. Like I said, the budget bill is a limited time document. But if you're doing a permanent ongoing program, you'll probably want to do trailer bill language. And it's really important for you to think about this before shopping your proposal around and drafting this language, because I can't tell you how many times we end up with these really great proposals, and all of our members are really excited about them, and they get included in the budget, and then we adopt it, as the legislature adopts the proposal, and then when the Department of Finance is trying to translate it into the budget bill language, they say, okay, so how do you want this program managed? And either we have to hurry up and talk to the advocates to really quickly draft some budget bill language, or what oftentimes happens is we have to rely on the Department of Finance to draft a language, and they will do a very minimalistic version of it, which will defer a lot of discretion to the department that's implementing the program, and may end up being inconsistent with the ultimate intent of your proposal. So important, if you want to have a say as to how your proposal is implemented, to get that language drafted as early as you can. So organization, this is fairly, I don't think this is rocket science for folks who are trying to influence policy in California, but build a coalition, find like-minded organizations and other stakeholders that are going to help you out, who are aligned with you. Not everybody needs to be a sponsor of it, but it can be helpful to see a lot of support letters so that you have a big coalition of folks who are supporting what you're trying to accomplish. Make sure you're preparing supporting documents. A lot of times the first time we in the legislature see a proposal is through fact sheets and budget letters. If you have, and I imagine this applies to a lot of folks who are listening right now, data or academic research is also really helpful. It's really it's a lot easier for us to if we're considering proposals, if the legislators are considering proposal and they ask people like us, whether or not these are worthwhile, being able to point to data or academic research that shows, yeah, this is a really a good idea, this has some merit, and here's maybe a pilot project or something that somebody did, or a study that somebody did that demonstrates that there's real value here. Some budget subcommittees have a process for submitting proposals. So you talk to your budget consultants and figure out what that process is. We in the budget sub 3 in the Senate have a budget worksheet that we have people fill out. And then finally, try to find a legislative champion. So, we sometimes will see proposals end up in the budget that weren't, signed on to by an assembly member or a senator, but they're a lot more likely to be considered for inclusion if you have a legislator who is championing your proposal. And then communication. So this is, when I when I talk to lobbyists like this, I say, try to meet with as many. It's like I'm telling lobbyists that they should go lobby. Well, I mean, it's a point that often gets missed. When the time comes for the members of each house to get together and decide what is and is not in the budget, it's important for those members, if your champion, say, brings it up with their colleagues, for them to go, oh yeah, I've heard of that. I met with those groups. They're fantastic, and yeah, this is a great thing. We should totally do this. So it's good to kind of create a zeitgeist within the membership of each house of the legislature, so that they know what it is, they're familiar with it, and they know whether or not they like it. And then this is important too. Talk to the administration. It can be a little frustrating sometimes to talk to them, because they'll, a lot of times they don't want to do new programs, they don't want to do new workload, but it's important to talk to them anyway, because they can't take a position, but they can provide you technical assistance. They can tell you whether or not your funding assumptions are correct, if there's technical problems, or if there are policy objections that they might have. So you can try and reach out to them during before the January budget. It's always a lot easier for us to approve something that was included in the January budget as the legislature than it is to advocate for it and try to force the administration to include it. And then after the budget is over, has been released, if your proposals are getting in touch with budget staff and being ready if the time comes to present your proposal in subcommittee hearings or make public comments, so that the members are hearing from you. And then after the Budget Act, if your proposal is adopted, it's also important to engage with the implementing department to make sure that they roll out the program the way that you want it. There's sometimes there's regulation process or stakeholder process. It's important to be engaged in those processes too, because a lot of really great proposals can go south in the implementation process after everybody's done high-fiving themselves and celebrating. And so my final bit of advice is, well, don't be intimidated by all these people. At the end of the day, we're all just kind of regular people. Everyone's just, doing a job, and a lot of people can be busy, but don't talk yourself out of calling somebody to find some time in their schedule to talk, no matter who they are, the governor's office or us or in the department. And then, don't be discouraged if things don't happen right away. So some of the biggest things that we've done in the past have taken many years to accomplish. We just recently eliminated the asset test in Medi-Cal for seniors and persons with disabilities. And this year was not the first year that proposal had been considered. It had been many, many years. And sometimes the window just opens and everything just kind of falls into place. So, keep pushing, and, eventually, if you're on the right side of things, good things happen. So that's it for me in terms of the presentation. Here's my contact information if you want to get in touch with me afterwards, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Scott. That was phenomenal. I wrote down about 5 or 6 questions, and then by the end you had answered most of them. So I think really amazing. For our attendees, if you want to go ahead and put questions in the Q&A, I'm happy to pose those questions to Scott. And of course, you can also follow up afterwards, but now for the next 10 minutes is a fantastic time to get your questions answered. I wanted to ask you a little bit, maybe just as a starting point, around sort of navigating all the different players. I feel like I've seen, I have often asked myself, like, do I first go to my local legislator? Do I first go to the budget committee staff? I think mostly what I'm hearing from you is try to do all of the above, but I don't know if you have any advice on sort of like where to start. I know obviously that the budget committee members oftentimes have more influence, but perhaps it's easier for us to get a hold of kind of our local legislators. So would just love your advice on sort of navigating all those different potential avenues to begin.
Well, I mean, this may be an unsatisfactory answer, but it depends. And I think it depends on the details of what you're trying to propose. If it's something that's, you know, district specific,
Mhm.
generally you'll just out of deference, you'll probably want to go to the legislator that represents whatever area the district specific request is in. But you know, I feel like generally your folks are going to be proposing things that have more of a statewide focus. So I think in that instance, you're probably going to want to look for a member, either the assembly or the Senate, that has a real like strong interest in that issue area. You know, either has, you know, past expertise or has run, you know, legislation in the past or has been a champion of similar issues in the past. And may, you know, may be interested in being a champion for what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
That's where I would go first. And then, you know, you know, like it's becoming more and more a feature of the process that having a member really go to bat for your proposal is essential. I mean, it's not 100% necessary, but it really helps.
Yeah, yeah, so helpful. And on the administration side, I know you've worked in the Department of Finance too. I think oftentimes that feels, at least to me, maybe it's just me, but feels a little bit more opaque or sort of hard to figure out where in the bureaucracy to start. And so I don't know if you have any advice on sort of figuring out who the right folks are to contact for any given proposal. Obviously depends on the proposal, but to sort of start to make those contacts within either the Department of Finance or the relevant agency that might be running the program.
Yeah, so well, when I was at Department of Finance, you know, we hardly ever met with stakeholder groups. It was very rare that one would either know to come talk to us at the Department of Finance or that even if they knew that they would break through all of the. It is kind of a burdensome and overbearing bureaucracy over there. But they do have on their websites they do have some contact points. I know they have an organization chart, and then they have what's called their chart of responsibilities, which is a full listing of what everybody's issue or departmental assignment is on the budget. So you may need to do sorry, it's in a weird place on their website. I think it's like under careers. Like if you click on careers and you go to who we are, at the bottom there's like a link to chart of responsibilities. They update that fairly frequently, but that'll give you a listing of who does what in the department. But I think if you're trying to get in touch with them, you'll probably want to go through their ledge deputy, who's part of their executive staff, and they're listed, I think, on the front page of that document. So you know they'll be able to help you. Either they'll pull in the relevant you know, line budget staff that need to be part of the conversation, or they'll just send you to them directly.
Mm-hmm. Great, really helpful. I will go and look for that chart. Janet, do you have a question?
Well, so it's kind of related to that on the administration side. You know, is it better to start with Department of Finance or better to start with the agency that would be responsible for implementing the budget proposal if it was enacted? You know, and my thinking there is to kind of, you know, not only get that technical assistance, but also see, well, is there support within the department? I know what's your thought about that?
Well, it depends on what part of the process you're in. So if your goal is to try and get the governor to include it in the budget,
yeah,
you know, the time to reach out to agency is probably, I mean, for next budget it's probably over, because the departments and agencies have already submitted all of their proposals. They worked on them from between June and August. So if you have something for next year that you want to start at the agency level, you should probably get to them even before the previous budget has been adopted. Or just, you know, sort of have an ongoing, you know, a lot of things, you know, are that they're in that category are the product of a you know, multi-year conversation about things. You know, and then occasionally, like, you know, they'll get a directive from either their agency or from the governor's office, like, hey, we want to do something on, like, you know, behavioral health workforce, or, you know, children with behavioral health, or something, and they'll be like, well, we've been talking to these folks about this for years, so why don't we, you know, get them in, and we'll get it together. So, you know, sometimes it's helpful to have an ongoing conversation, just to you know, begin, and then, you know, try, you know, keep pushing. If it doesn't work out, just kind of keep the conversation going. Department of Finance is probably where you'd want to check in around now. They're, usually at this point in the process, they're evaluating what the departments and agencies have sent them. So there's not a whole lot of room for brand new stuff from the departments and the agencies. But a feature that seems to have appended itself to this administration is that oftentimes the governor's office will drop new proposals in to the Department of Finance's workflow fairly late in the process. So at this point in the process, it might be more worthwhile if you're trying to influence something that's in this upcoming January's budget to go talk to the governor's office and make your case there. Because then they will, if they really get excited about it, and then, the governor gets excited about it, it'll just be a directive that they give the Department of Finance. Hey, you got to include this.
Mm-hmm.
Now I will say this is a very rare occurrence. It's not unheard of, but it's unless they're really motivated to do something, it's hard to do it this way. But if you do manage to get it in, it makes your life a lot easier. So it's always worth trying.
Yeah. I think definitely one of the things I took away from this conversation is the multi-year nature of things, and also the sort of year-round nature of the process, even more than I had appreciated before. I'm curious also your thoughts on sort of public comment. I think I oftentimes get the question of like, does it really matter? And written versus actually showing up at the hearing, whether that makes an impact. And kind of your overall thought process on whether that's helpful or whether it's really more important to start to think about meeting with people before.
Well, I think it's important to show support for a proposal. There's kind of a point of diminishing returns in terms of how many people sign up for public comments. You can, because I'm sitting in there with the chair and the members, and they're sitting there, and they're listening to public comments, and and so then they're often really impactful, important proposals, and a lot of people are really passionate about them, and there's a lot of organizing that goes on. A lot of people sign up to basically say they support the proposal. But there's a limit. So after like about a dozen people basically saying the same thing about this really great proposal, it starts to just get a little repetitive. So it's hard to really find that balance, of showing how overwhelming the support is for what you're trying to accomplish, versus just, you've organized a bunch of people and they're reading off the same scripts, and then the members kind of know the difference. So it's a bit of a delicate balance, but having a lot of people come and support within reason, I think is worthwhile for members to hear that there's a lot of support for a proposal. It's also a way that it sort of gets stuck in their head when the time comes to start making budget decisions.
Yeah. Well, it's 12:59, so I think we'll maybe wrap up unless you have a last minute question, Janet. No. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I know I learned a ton, and particularly sort of taking away the fact that often these things can feel slow, but then everything can sort of fall into place, and don't give up, be persistent, and don't be intimidated. So I know I'll be taking that away and sharing that with all my colleagues and with the trainees that I work with. So thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Scott. I think this has been very helpful to folks here at UCSF. And as a reminder to our audience, this talk is being recorded. So if there are other people on your research teams and your departments who you think would benefit, contact us and we can make the recording available. Bethany, I'll also do a shout out for our November webinar. And that will be the second Wednesday in November, which is the 9th. And that's going to be a little different format. It's going to be sort of a roundtable discussion on, how to improve your policy long game, how to be engaged effectively over the long term. And we'll have Tracy Woodruff from here at UCSF, who, is a longstanding researcher and advocate around reproductive health. Anthony Wright, who is the Executive Director of Health Access, which works very, I'd say, tirelessly at the state and local levels on health insurance and affordability issues. And then Patty Barahona, who is the CEO of Youth, and now I'm blanking,
The Youth Leadership Institute.
Youth Leadership Institute, and does a lot of really grassroots work with youth. And we purposely have this eclectic group because we really want to have folks who have invested large chunks of their careers in long-term advocacy and really to give insights from different vantage points of how you stay in the process over the long run to be in the right place with the right information so that when the window opens, things do indeed fall into place. So with that, we thank everyone for joining us.
Thank you.